Hello, I'm Jennifer Arruda, and I'm here with you today to talk about reversing autoimmune diseases. And you can check out more on my husband and my website, reverseautoimmune.com. And we are going to talk about how to reverse autoimmune in the kitchen with the recipes that you make with the food that you eat. So today we are going to make a cheesecake, not just any cheesecake, but a cheesecake that will actually help you on your path to healing. And you know, one thing that is really challenging for people who find out they have an autoimmune disease is many times they have lots of allergies. This is because you have leaky gut when you have autoimmune disease. And so with so many allergies, some that you may have symptoms for, maybe some you don't even have symptoms for, but they're causing leaky gut, it's hard to know what to eat. And when my husband found out he had autoimmune disease, he did a test to measure the IgAs in his stool. It was a stool sample test. And that's a great test to get. And he thought maybe a couple things would show up on the list, but he found he had lots of things on the list. And so overnight, we realized we had to radically change our diets. And I'm the cook, so I had to change mine too, and I wanted to support him as well, so I didn't want to have things that would tempt him in the house. So the number one thing that autoimmune disease sufferers need to get off of is gluten. And then also there's other things that are helpful to get off of, and over time you can experiment with adding some things back in. But several things on my husband's list were gluten and soy, even oats. There were other things too that he was having a mild reaction to, which showed he was having a leaky gut reaction in his small intestine, but we had to give up a lot of things. And if we were already not having any meat or dairy or eggs in our diet, so it really limited what we can have. So many people who are suffering from autoimmune diseases are thinking, okay, I know I have this disease, I know that there's certain things that I can't eat now. Well, what do I eat? And it can be rather difficult to think of the many foods that you can't eat. And so, with not being able to have gluten, dairy, eggs, soy, and a few other things, you can think, well, how could you ever have a cheesecake? Well, this cheesecake is going to be gluten-free, soy-free, vegan, so it's actually going to help you in your healing. But I have to say, although it's free of all these other things, it is not taste-free. It is full of flavor, and I call this recipe, I can't believe it's not cheesecake, because I like it so much. And so we're going to start with the crust here for our cheesecake. So we have a food processor here, and we have our crust ingredients. We're going to put in the food processor. So we have 1 cup of almonds. Now, something about nuts and also seeds, grains, and legumes, beans, lentils, all of these things, anything that can sprout and grow a plant, so it would technically be a seed, anything that can do that has a coating around it. They're called enzyme inhibitors and anti-nutrients, and this is so that the seed doesn't sprout anywhere. They can even pass through an animal's digestive tract and be spread from place to place. Well, what happens with that is that 40 to 80% of the nutrients are locked in the seed or the grain. And when I found this out, I thought, I've been getting robbed. I've been eating these great whole foods this whole time, and I've been missing sometimes up to 80% of the nutrients. And so what we do, my husband and I, we'll take our nuts, like the almonds, walnuts, and we'll soak a big bowl of them overnight, or 8 hours. Then we drain them and rinse them well. And then we put them in a dehydrator, or if you don't have a dehydrator, you can put them in the oven on a pan at the lowest temperature possible. And you let them dehydrate 10 to 12 hours or until they're nice and crispy. And they're so good out of the oven, just warm and crispy. And sometimes you can toss them with a little salt and maple syrup, and they're so delicious like that when they come out nice and crispy. So anyways, we just pre-dehydrate our nuts, and then they're dried and they're ready to use for cooking. And so this is 1 cup of almonds. And then we have the buckwheat. Now with the buckwheat, I soaked this as well overnight and then drained it and rinsed it. Something else besides not getting the nutrients that happens with these enzyme inhibitors and anti-nutrients is what they're called lectins, saponins, phytates, and these things, besides locking in the nutrients, they also bind with the cells that line your small intestine, and they can cause leaky gut. Now, for someone who doesn't have an already damaged gut or on the way to a damaged gut, it might not be as big a deal, but we've seen people suffering from autoimmune disease have great results when they're soaking and draining and rinsing their seeds, nuts, legumes, and grains. So I would highly recommend that. My husband and I have learned to do this. It doesn't take that much more work, just a little extra thought beforehand. You just soak it before you go to bed, then you can use it the next morning, or soak it during the day and then use it that evening. What's even better too, if you have the forethought, is to let them sprout. When you let these things sprout, they actually release more nutrients, especially your B12. And so if you have the time after draining, rinsing them, you could just let them sit out for the rest of the day or that night or the next day too, and you'll see they start to grow little tails, the little sprouts come out. You don't want to let it go too far along, because then it actually changes the structure of the seed. Which is fine if you're going to eat it like a sprout, but if you're going to use it in a recipe, it is going to change it to be more like a sprout, which is a green plant. So they release more nutrients and they're better for you. So these have been soaked overnight and then drained and rinsed. So these are the buckwheat. These are hulled buckwheat, and so they don't have the brown part to them like you see that hearty flour. And so these are still moist, which is fine. We need a little moisture for this recipe. So we're just going to add the buckwheat sprouts to the food processor. And then we have 1 cup of dates, and you want to just go through, maybe cut them open or split them open, make sure they don't have pits. If you get even 1 pit with your dates, you're going to hear it cracking about the blender or food processor, and it's going to go into pieces, and you're going to be biting on them, and hopefully you won't break a tooth. So just look ahead of time to make sure your dates are in fact pitted, even if they're labeled pitted. We have 1/2 cup of coconut, shredded coconut. This is unsweetened. Coconut is very good for people with autoimmune conditions. It's very good for the small intestine. And then we have just a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. A little bit of salt to bump up the flavor. When you stimulate more of your taste buds, you have the salt, the sweet, the sour, the bitter. When you stimulate more of those taste buds in one recipe, that is what enhances the flavor. So it might not be the dominant flavor. The dominant flavor here is obviously sweet, but just that touch of salt is going to bump up the flavor and even make it taste a little sweeter. So that's a nice little trick as you're cooking. Okay, so we're just going to process this in the food processor until it's crumbly. You can see it's kind of clumping together, but you want not a complete dough, but you want a crumbly texture. And so we will just go around the edge to get the extras, scrape it down in, and pulse it a few more times. You could also do this with the dry buckwheat, and then you would just process it and then add a little water and process again. But since we soaked it, we don't need to do that. Now we're going to take this is a springform pan. It makes it nice because at the end, once it's hardened, you can pop it out like this and you have a really nice presentation. So, but this just goes like that. So we're going to take our crust ingredients and just press it into the crust. So you just want to spread it out and as evenly as you can, and then just press it down into the crust pan, into the springform pan. Okay, so we have it pressed into our pan. Nice crust there. Okay, I'm just going to wash my hands here real quick. Okay, the crust gets a little sticky. Now we're going to move on to the filling of the cheesecake. Now the filling is based on cashews, and we have squash and rice, some brown rice. You can also use cooked millet. This is cooked brown rice. A note on the squash: zucchini and yellow squash are both items that are genetically modified, and so I'd highly recommend getting organic to make sure you're not eating GMOs. GMOs are very, 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 very important to avoid when you have autoimmune. I would recommend for everyone, but especially if you have autoimmune, as that is one of the contributors to getting the leaky gut and therefore the autoimmune disease. So just be careful on that. If you can grow it out of your garden, that's even better. So you notice here we have all whole ingredients. Everything we've been making, they're whole plant food ingredients. That's really the best diet. If you could put it simply, meat and dairy-based diets are bad for you. Refined food diets are bad for you. Whole plant food-based diets are good for you. And so this cheesecake, we're not going to bake it. It's going to be almost raw. We have like a cup of cooked brown rice. But you'll notice these are whole plant foods. One of the things you'll notice when you look into raw recipes, which it's good to get a lot of raw food. However, if you look at the raw food movement, the typical raw food movement, you're going to find that it is heavily laden with fats. And I'm not talking about just fats like nuts. I'm talking about lots of oils. This is really hard to digest in your system. Your liver processes your fats. It's hard on your liver. And we just weren't designed to eat these refined products. Oil is 100% fat. And so when you think about the calories that your body size or your desired body size would need, if you're eating a lot of oil, you really can't eat that much in the day. You only are going to eat a little bit of food to get that calorie requirement, versus if you're eating the whole foods, you can eat a lot more food and feel full. And this is actually how you can lose extra weight, lose fat, by not starving yourself, which I don't recommend starving yourself. You can eat whole plant foods and you can be full and enjoy your food. So just keep in mind when you look at maybe raw cheesecakes that you typically find, that you might find half cashews and then half coconut oil, which coconut is a great product, but the oil, that's just a lot of fat. And even when you have whole fats like nuts, avocados, seeds, olives, you still don't want to have lots and lots of fat as a major portion of your diet. about 15% of your daily caloric intake should be fat, 15% protein, and then 70% carbohydrates. We were designed to eat mostly carbohydrates. And when you look at the food, God sent us a clear message. When the fats, like the nuts, he packaged them in hard to open shells. So they take more work and time to get into them. I can imagine he did that to tell us that you shouldn't be having this all the time as a large portion of your food. Fruits are way more accessible, vegetables as well. So we're going to make the filling for, I can't believe it's not cheesecake. So we have cashews. This is 2 cups of cashews. The cashews, they've actually, even though if you buy them raw, these are raw cashews, they've actually been steamed to open them. And so they're technically not a raw food. So you don't need to soak them like you do the other grains and nuts and seeds for 8 hours. I soaked these just for 2 hours, and it kind of plumps them up, makes them blend really nicely. Also, if you notice, sometimes you'll, when you open your bag of cashews, they might smell a little fishy, the raw cashews, and so this also helps with any of that scent that you might have. So we're going to add these to the blender. 2 cups of raw cashews. If you buy them in bulk, it ends up being cheaper. And then we have this squash, 2 cups of organic yellow squash. You could use zucchini, but that's going to change the color, which you might not care about. But this keeps it more of a lighter color. And then we have 1 cup of cooked brown rice. You could also do 1 cup of cooked millet as well. That makes some really good puddings. You can actually blend millet to make a pudding. It's funny to think of blending your grains to make puddings, but it's amazing what you can do with a little creativity in the kitchen. And these things are so healthy for you. They're whole grains, lots of fiber, which is important to keep your system moving. And then we have a can of coconut milk. And this is an organic coconut milk I got from Whole Foods. And we buy it by the case. You can save 10% in that case. And it's non-BPA lining. So you have a lining to protect from any aluminum, and then you also have that lining is BPA free. So that's really nice. All right. And then we have here 1/2 cup of fresh squeezed lemon juice. That's going to give the cheesecake its tart flavor. And then we have 1/2 cup of honey. Now, honey is an amazing gift from God. We like to get unheated honey. You see raw honey in the store. Technically, raw honey can be heated to 120 degrees to keep it shelf stable. But that is good, but you're not quite getting the benefit you could, because if you get it completely unheated, it actually is one of the best sources of probiotics, which is that good bacteria in your gut. The best sources are the raw cabbage and then unheated honey. And also you're going to get the pollen. That's really good. If you have allergies, people actually can take honey or pollen, straight pollen itself, for allergies. And so with the bees digesting the honey, it has this good probiotic in it. And this is good for wounds if it's unheated. Also, it's been known to be effective in shrinking tumors with cancer. And it has to be unheated, though, to have that good beneficial bacteria. That's part of the good effect of it. So the Bible says, "Hast thou found honey? Only eat so much." You don't want to overdo it even in the good things. So we have honey, and then also as a sweetener for this, we have a 1/4 cup of maple syrup. And this makes it so that the honey is just not quite as strong a taste. I don't mind the strong taste of honey, so you could do 3/4 cup, but if you don't like the strong taste of honey, you can balance it out with a 1/4 cup of maple syrup. And make sure this is the real stuff, just 100% maple syrup, because if you look at that other stuff that they call maple syrup, there's actually no maple syrup in it. It's just like high fructose corn syrup and other things that you probably never want to put in your body. So that's to sweeten it. And then we have here 2-inch piece of vanilla bean. I really like using the vanilla bean. We buy it in bulk because it's just your most natural form of vanilla. You could also use some alcohol-free vanilla extract, but I really like this kind, and it gives it that beany look. And then we have 1/4 teaspoon of salt, again, to bump up that flavor. And that's it for the cheesecake filling. So we're going to blend this on high until it's smooth. It'll probably be about a minute or longer until it's smooth. Okay, let's check if this is smooth. It should be, but you never know. I think it might need a little longer. You just want to make sure it's really smooth and creamy. No chunks. No chunks or grit. Okay, that should be good. So we're going to pour it onto our crust in the springform pan. This makes a nice big cheesecake where you can eat off of it all week. It smells delicious. You know, the nice thing about this is when you're cooking healthy like this, you're using whole plant food ingredients, you can have cheesecake for breakfast. That is one of the benefits of eating healthy. Cheesecake for breakfast. Okay, so we have here the cheesecake. So we're going to just cover it with, you could cover it with plastic wrap, or I have a plastic plate here, you can just cover it and then stick it in the freezer. You want to freeze it for about 4 to 6 hours until it's firm, or you can do it overnight. And then we're going to cover it with the topping. So we're going to do the topping now, but I'm going to stick this in the freezer. So now that it's been 6 hours, we've pulled our cheesecake out of the freezer and it's firmed up. And so now it's ready for the topping and ready to serve. And so for the topping, you can do any number of things. We're doing raspberries today. You could also do mango, strawberries, any topping that you like. So these are frozen raspberries. They've de-thawed. We're just going to put them in the blender. And we're going to add a little bit of honey. We have 2 tablespoons of honey. And this is going to balance out the tartness of the raspberries. If you did the mango, frozen mango, then you probably wouldn't need as much honey or even any honey at all because it's a bit sweeter. So we'll just put 2 tablespoons of honey with this raspberry. With this unheated honey, again, you're getting great probiotics. So we're just going to blend it, not too much, but just till it's not very chunky anymore. Let's see, so you take a look at the consistency. You can always blend it again, but you can't unblend it. So I think that's a good consistency there we have ready for our topping. And so you can do it one of 2 ways. If you pour it on now, it's just going to go on the top. But you could also, if the cheesecake is still not firm yet, you could pour it in and then marbleize it by dragging a knife through it and making a marble look. So we'll just pour it on the top though. And you just want to spread it in the areas that need it. So we'll just spread it out till it's evenly dispersed. There we go, and that's ready to serve. Or it can go back in the freezer to firm up the topping if you want. You can put lots of other toppings, you can put fresh fruit on top, whatever you prefer. There's lots of variety. So why do this? Why to go to the effort to actually make a plant-based vegan cheesecake instead of just going to the store and buying a dairy cheesecake? Well, the Bible says in 1 Corinthians 10:31, whatsoever you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. And so when you're motivated to value your temple that God's given you, then you're going to make better choices, which include going towards a more plant-based diet. So I hope you've been blessed to learn a vegan, gluten-free cheesecake with whole foods, whole plant foods. And I pray that you may be blessed in your pursuit of health.